Solo female hiker vanished in 2011. 7 years later, her sleeping bag is found in a lake. She lived for the trail, for the silence of the forest and the clean air. 26-year-old Sarah was an experienced hiker, methodical and well-prepared. When she set out on a solo trip through the mountains of Virginia, no one was worried. But on the 6th day, her daily check-in messages stopped. A week later, the search was called off. 7 years later, in a lake 100 miles from her route, her sleeping bag was found, tightly sealed. But what was inside shocked everyone. The body belonged to another woman who disappeared during the same period. What really happened, and where did Sarah vanish to? Watch to the end to find the truth. Tell us in the comments, what city are you watching this video from? Sarah lived for the trail. She was an experienced solo hiker, meticulous and prepared. At 26, she knew the Appalachian Trail like the back of her hand. Her current trip through the mountains of Virginia was just another journey, a few weeks of solitude and fresh air. Her brother, Michael, was her only contact. They had a daily check-in routine, a single text message every evening. He always worried, but he trusted her. For the first 5 days, the texts came like clockwork. A quick, all good, a photo of a scenic view. Life was peaceful. On the 6th day, the message never arrived. Michael's first thought was a bad signal, a dead battery. He gave it an hour, then 2. By nightfall, his stomach was in knots. He tried calling, but her phone went straight to voicemail. The following morning brought no word. Michael, a man of action, drove straight to the last known trailhead. Her car was still there, parked neatly. Its presence was a silent scream. He reported her missing. Local authorities and seasoned park rangers launched a massive search. They scoured the thick forests and rugged terrain. They found Sarah's campsite, meticulously packed up, a small fire pit still cold. There were no signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings, no trail. Her backpack was nowhere to be found. The search continued for weeks, turning up nothing. The trail had gone cold. Her disappearance became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. As the years turned into a decade, her family was left with only questions and a gnawing emptiness. The silence that followed Sarah's missed check-in felt different, heavier than a dead phone or a poor signal. It was a physical weight on Michael's chest. He had tried every conceivable way to reach her. He called her cell phone again, only to be met with the same automated greeting. He called the number for her satellite phone, a small black device she had sworn would prevent this exact scenario. It rang and rang, a hollow sound echoing in his small apartment. After 24 hours of waiting, hope had curdled into a cold, hard certainty. He packed a bag and drove south to the trailhead in Virginia, his mind racing through every possible explanation. An injury, a fall, a twisted ankle. Something bad had happened. He knew it. Reaching the small gravel parking lot, he saw it immediately. Sarah's dark blue Ford Explorer, just as she had described it, was sitting exactly where she had left it. It was locked and undisturbed, a stark monument to her last known location. He stood there for a long time, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees, the only movement the slow, painful beat of his heart. The empty car was both a relief and a confirmation. She hadn't just driven away. Her disappearance had begun here, on the trail. He reported her missing to the local sheriff's department. The officer took his statement with a practiced calm that Michael found both reassuring and deeply unsettling. A missing hiker on the Appalachian Trail was a common, almost routine occurrence, but this was his sister. A search party was assembled, a mixture of law enforcement and seasoned park rangers. They fanned out into the dense green wilderness, moving methodically along the path Sarah was known to be following. The forest was vast, a labyrinth of trees and stone, and the sheer scale of the operation was staggering. They found Sarah's final campsite, a well-chosen spot near a small stream. It was tidy, with no sign of a struggle, but her tent and sleeping bag were gone. Her pack, a signature olive green rucksack, was also missing. It was not a simple accident. The search teams continued for weeks, expanding their grid, their optimism fading with each passing day. The initial search and rescue effort transformed into a desperate, frustrating hunt for any sign of her. The woods held their secrets tight. As autumn faded into winter, the search was finally called off. The lack of clues, the missing gear, and the sheer size of the wilderness left them with nothing but a cold, empty trail. The mystery deepened as the investigation stalled. 7 years is a long time. It was enough time for the posters of Sarah's face to fade and peel, enough time for the ache in Michael's heart to settle into a permanent, heavy quiet. The search had ended. The speculation had died down. Sarah's case was officially closed, moved to a dusty box in a back room of the sheriff's office. Michael's life had continued, but it was a life defined by a question mark. There was no grave to visit, no final goodbye. He had tried to find peace, but how could he, when her story had no ending? The vast green wilderness of the Appalachian Trail had swallowed her whole and left nothing behind. Far from the main trail, in a secluded corner of the Shenandoah Valley, sat Lake Laurel. It was a deep, cold body of water, ringed by thick forest, a place of quiet reflection. Tom, a retired mechanic with a love for fishing, spent his days on a small aluminum boat, a solitary figure on the placid surface. It was a regular Tuesday morning, with the sun just beginning to burn off the mist. He cast his line, a habitual, practiced motion. The line went taut almost immediately, but the pull was wrong. It was a dead weight, not the frantic struggle of a fish. He thought it was a snag on an old stump. He fought with the line for several minutes, the heavy resistance straining his old shoulders. The object finally dislodged, and he began the slow, arduous process of reeling it in. As it neared the surface, he saw a flash of color that did not belong in the murky water. A deep, vibrant purple, an unnatural contrast to the browns and greens of the lake bed. A shape began to emerge, oblong and lumpy. It was something man-made, sealed tightly. He finally managed to get the object into the boat. It was a sleeping bag, old and waterlogged, tied shut with a length of faded heavy rope. The fabric was slick with algae, but he could still make out the distinct, bright purple color. He knew what a sleeping bag was used for, and the strange weight of this one filled him with a sudden icy dread. It had been down there for a long time. The rope was cinched so tight, it looked deliberate, a knot that was meant to hold. He sat there for a moment, the rhythmic lapping of the water against the boat now sounding like a sinister drum. This was not a misplaced item. This was a mystery waiting to be found. Tom reached for his cell phone with a trembling hand, his quiet morning shattered. The discovery had reawakened a ghost. The quiet scene on Lake Laurel was quickly replaced by the cold, calculated efficiency of law enforcement. A forensics team arrived, their boat moving through the water with purpose. They treated the fisherman Tom with polite professionalism, taking his statement and his old boat as evidence. The purple sleeping bag, heavy and reeking of stagnation, was carefully placed in an airtight bag and transported to the state lab. The ghost of Sarah's case, which had haunted the community for years, was now tangible, a macabre piece of evidence pulled from the depths. The investigation centered entirely on the bag and its contents. Forensic pathologists and detectives moved with a methodical reverence for the cold case now lying on their slab. The process of unsealing the bag and examining the remains was slow. The body was badly decomposed, a testament to the 7 years it had spent submerged. But the details that mattered most were preserved. The first order of business was confirmation. The detectives were operating on a powerful assumption. The unique purple color and brand of the sleeping bag were a direct match to the one Sarah had purchased for her trip. For a brief, horrible moment, everyone was certain they had found Sarah. That certainty shattered with the forensic report. The dental records and DNA samples collected from the remains were conclusive. The body was a woman, but it was not Sarah. The shock in the sterile lab was palpable. Who was in Sarah's sleeping bag, and where was Sarah herself? The case took a sudden, violent turn. The identity of the remains was quickly established through the state's missing persons database. The woman was identified as 27-year-old Laura Vance, a librarian from a small town in the valley, reported missing just 3 days before Sarah's disappearance in 2011. The new lead investigator, Detective Ramirez, sat in his office late into the night, staring at 2 separate case files that were now irrevocably linked. 2 women, both gone in the same month, from the same general area, were now connected by a single, terrifying discovery. One woman's body was found in the other's sleeping bag. Laura Vance was not known to be a hiker. She disappeared from her home, a quiet house in town, leaving behind no clues. The question of where Sarah was had been pushed aside by a far more chilling question. How did Laura Vance's body get into Sarah's sleeping bag, and what did that mean for the fate of Sarah herself? The investigation, dormant for 7 long years, was now wide open, and far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. The discovery of Laura Vance's body in Sarah's sleeping bag had shattered the years of silence and inactivity. Detective Ramirez, a man with a quiet intensity, now had a puzzle far more complex than any missing person case. The 2 women, separated by profession and personality, were now linked by a macabre twist of fate. The first step was to revisit everything, every interview, every piece of evidence, every report from the initial searches in 2011. He pulled both files and spread them across his desk. The stories of a free-spirited hiker and a reserved librarian seemed to have no common thread. The answer, he knew, was in the details. He began with the families, speaking to Michael again. 7 years of grief had not dulled Michael's memory, but the passing of time had allowed small, seemingly insignificant memories to resurface. He remembered Sarah mentioning a new hobby she was exploring to meet people with similar interests. She had joined a local photography club. It was a new detail that had been overlooked in the panic of the initial search. Sarah was an artist, but she preferred the solitude of nature. The club was her attempt to branch out. Ramirez went to the community arts center where the club met. The records were old and incomplete, but he found a roster from that year. Sarah's name was on it. He then cross-referenced this with Laura Vance's life. Laura was not an artist. She was a librarian who found comfort in quiet, organized spaces, but a small, handwritten note in her diary, which had been collected as evidence, mentioned attending a Meet the Artists community night at the same arts center. The 2 women had been in the same room at the same time, sharing a mutual interest in the small, creative community. A deeper dive into the club's past revealed a darker undercurrent. A woman who was a founding member of the club, now retired and living out of state, recalled an unsettling presence. A man who was not a photographer, but would often show up, charismatic, but with an unsettling, watchful gaze. He was a local handyman, a jack of all trades with a reputation for being a little too friendly with the young women. His name was Silas Crow. He was the kind of person who seemed to fade into the background, but his presence was always felt. The former club member mentioned an unusual tattoo he had on his arm, a prominent, faded compass tattoo, its intricate lines almost indistinguishable from a bruise. It was a detail too specific to ignore. The name, the job, the tattoo, it all pointed in one direction. The investigation had a face. Silas Crow. The name was now a cold, sharp point in Detective Ramirez's mind. He ran the name through every available database, his fingers flying across the keyboard in the quiet, late-night office. The initial search results were thin, but present. A rap sheet with minor offenses. Assault. A restraining order violation. Several counts of breaking and entering. He was a small-time criminal, the kind that authorities knew but never considered a major threat. The details were disturbing, but not conclusive. Ramirez needed more. He delved deeper into the records. Silas had been a handyman for various properties in the Shenandoah Valley, a transient lifestyle that allowed him to move around and remain unnoticed. He worked for cash, leaving little to no digital footprint. But there were old tax records, property deeds, and a single, faded driver's license photo from 7 years prior. The man staring back at Ramirez was gaunt, with an unsettling intensity in his eyes. On his left forearm was the faint, circular outline of a compass tattoo, just as the witness had described. The tattoo was a crude, homemade design, and it was a match. Ramirez pulled up the man's last known address. It was a remote, dilapidated cabin deep in the woods, just a few miles from the trailhead where Sarah's car had been found. The location was perfect for someone who wanted to disappear, a place where no one would hear a scream or see a struggle. It was a place for secrets. The internal puzzle pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. Silas was the link between the two women. He had been watching Laura Vance at the Community Arts Center, and he had been watching Sarah there as well. He knew their schedules, their habits, their vulnerabilities. He was a predator. The next morning, Ramirez organized a tactical team. They moved with a silent, calculated purpose, the grim details of the case fresh in their minds. The road to the cabin was little more than a dirt path, overgrown with weeds. They came to a clearing, and the cabin stood before them, a weathered, forgotten structure. There were no lights on, no smoke from the chimney. A deep, unsettling silence hung in the air. The team approached cautiously. The door was unlocked. Ramirez pushed it open, his hand on his sidearm. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. It was empty. The cabin had been abandoned for years, but on a small, rickety table in the center of the room, a single, recent fingerprint had been lifted by a forensic investigator, a ghostly new lead in a 7-year-old mystery. The forensic lab's report on the single fingerprint from the dusty cabin table arrived a day later. It was a match. The print belonged to Silas Crow. This discovery was a jolt of electricity to the long-dormant case, confirming that the man was not only alive, but had been in that very cabin sometime in the last few months. 7 years of silence had been shattered by a single, careless touch. The hunt for a forgotten phantom was now a high-stakes manhunt for an active threat. Detective Ramirez knew he was close. The search for Silas Crow intensified. Ramirez and his team used every resource at their disposal, but Silas was a ghost. His social security number hadn't been used for any official employment in years. He had no bank accounts, no credit cards, no digital footprint whatsoever. He was a man who lived outside the system, a shadow moving through the forgotten corners of society. Ramirez's team began to canvass the local community again, this time with a new focus: the compass tattoo. They showed the old photo to everyone who knew Silas, to anyone who had seen him. The breakthrough came from an old gas station attendant, a man with a sharp memory for faces and details. He hadn't seen Silas in years, but a few months ago, he had served a man with a distinct faded compass tattoo on his forearm. The man was driving a beat-up dark green pickup truck with a broken tail light and a distinctive rust patch on the driver's side door. It was a crucial detail, something that set this man apart from the rest. The attendant remembered the truck clearly because it had a unique bumper sticker for a small, obscure local band that had been popular years ago. With the truck description and the bumper sticker, Ramirez's team was able to cross-reference with vehicle registration records. After days of sifting through thousands of entries, they found a match. The truck was registered to a P. Jones, an alias Silas had used in the past. The address on the registration was a small, run-down trailer park on the outskirts of another town, nearly 100 miles away. This was the next step. The final piece of the puzzle was coming into focus. The chase was on. The address led them to a desolate trailer park on the edge of the county, a forgotten place where rusted mobile homes huddled together under a canopy of skeletal trees. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. The team moved with practiced silence, their approach calculated and swift. They located the specific trailer, a dented aluminum box with a broken window patched with duct tape. It was isolated, tucked away in the farthest corner of the park, a perfect lair for a man who preferred shadows. The atmosphere was thick with a heavy, watchful silence. Ramirez felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, hard certainty that this was it. They were finally at the end of the long road. He gave the signal, and the team breached the door. The inside was a time capsule of neglect. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mold and old cigarettes. Dust lay over everything, a silent testament to the months, if not years, since anyone had lived there. The trailer was empty. The furniture was sparse and broken. There was no sign of Silas Crow. The address was another dead end, a place he had used and abandoned. The frustration was a bitter taste in Ramirez's mouth. But the trailer was not without its secrets. In a small, cramped closet, they found a metal lockbox hidden beneath a pile of old clothes. Inside, it was a horror show. There were 2 items. The first was a series of meticulously organized newspaper clippings. They were all from a decade ago, detailing the disappearances of 4 different women from various parts of the state. These were not just Sarah and Laura. The cases were all cold, all unconnected until this moment. The chilling pattern was now undeniable. Silas was not a one-time offender. He was a methodical, cunning predator, and his timeline of terror stretched back further than they ever imagined. The second item was a single laminated photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, no more than 20, with a kind smile and light brown hair. She was holding a small silver locket. She was not one of the women from the newspaper clippings. She was a new face, a new victim, a ghost whose disappearance had never been officially reported. The back of the photograph had a single date, written in faded black ink. It was the date of Sarah's disappearance. The two women had vanished on the same day. The realization hit Ramirez with the force of a physical blow. Silas had not killed Sarah. He had taken two women on the same day from the same town. Sarah was a witness to another murder. The hunt for a killer had just become a desperate search for a survivor. The photograph was a fresh wound in the heart of the cold case. A beautiful young woman, no more than 20, with a kind smile that belied the horror of her fate. The date on the back, a simple scrawl in black ink, tied her inextricably to Sarah's disappearance. Detective Ramirez stared at the image, a new, terrible question filling the void that had been a silent mystery for 7 years. Sarah was not the victim of a random act of violence. She was a witness. She had been there. She had seen something. This new woman, whose name was unknown, was the first victim of a double disappearance that had gone unnoticed for an entire decade. Ramirez ran the photograph through the state's facial recognition software. The results were inconclusive. The picture was old, slightly faded, and the angle was not ideal. He knew this would be a long shot. The hunt for this new ghost would have to be old-fashioned. He sent a copy of the photograph, along with the details of the silver locket she was holding, to every police department in the region. He spoke to every retired detective he could find, every officer who had worked the original Sarah case. He knew that in a case this cold, the only thing that could unearth new information was a human memory. The lead came from a retired county deputy named Frank, a man who had been the first on the scene when Michael reported Sarah missing. Frank's memory was a steel trap. He had a reputation for remembering the smallest details. He looked at the photograph for a long time, a quiet sadness in his eyes. He didn't know her name, but he remembered her. She worked as a waitress at a small roadside diner in the next town over. She had disappeared around the same time as Sarah, but her parents, who lived out of state, had reported her as a runaway. They had a difficult relationship, and her disappearance was never taken seriously. Frank had spoken to them at the time, and they had given him the girl's name, Emily. They had mentioned a silver locket, a family heirloom from her great-grandmother, a piece of jewelry that meant everything to her. The locket in the photograph was the same one. Ramirez now had a name, Emily. The fact that her case was never officially filed as a missing person explained why she had never been identified. It was a terrifying loophole that Silas had exploited. The puzzle was becoming clearer. Ramirez took a drive to the town where Emily had worked, to the small Greasy Spoon diner that was still in business. He spoke to the current owner, an old man who had been working there since the 70s. The man remembered Emily. He also remembered Silas Crow, the local handyman who had been hired to fix a broken boiler. The owner described a subtle tension between the two, an unspoken threat. Emily had been frightened of him. The owner remembered a day when Emily's shift ended and Silas had been waiting for her outside. He had seen them get into Silas's truck together. He never saw Emily again after that day. The owner, a man who had seen many young people come and go, had assumed she had left town with him. Ramirez's hand shook as he took notes. This was not a random act of violence. It was a calculated abduction. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Why was Sarah there? And where was she now? The weight of the new information was heavy, cold. The two women, Sarah and Emily, had not just disappeared. They had been taken. Detective Ramirez replayed the diner owner's memory in his mind. The image of Silas Crow waiting outside. The two women getting into his truck. It was not a chance encounter. It was a calculated abduction. Sarah, the seasoned hiker, was not the intended target, but a witness, and now her disappearance was more terrifyingly intentional. The investigation was no longer about a cold case. It was about a predator who had operated in the open for years, and a young woman who was likely a victim of circumstance. Ramirez assembled his team, their faces a grim reflection of his own realization. The focus of the investigation shifted entirely. The search for a living Silas Crow was put on the back burner. The priority was to understand what happened at the abandoned cabin, the place where the two women were most likely taken. They had missed something during the first search, a detail that was now screamingly obvious. The cabin wasn't a hideout, it was a trap. They returned to the cabin with a new purpose, a meticulous, methodical approach. Every inch of the property was scrutinized. They checked for loose floorboards, false walls, hidden compartments. The team worked in silence, their movements a stark contrast to the thick, oppressive stillness of the woods. They found it in the cellar, hidden beneath a pile of moldy firewood and a false wall of rotting planks. It was a small, crudely built room, a concrete bunker in the cold earth. It was empty now, a silent chamber of horrors, but it held secrets. On a dusty shelf wrapped in a plastic bag, they found Sarah's backpack, the signature olive green rucksack that had been missing for 7 years. It was in pristine condition, preserved from the elements. Inside, amidst her camping gear and clothes, they found her hiking journal. It was filled with her usual trail notes and observations about nature, but the last entry was different. The handwriting was frantic, the words a desperate scrawl. The entry detailed how Emily had been lured to the cabin, and how Sarah, who was there to meet her friend, had been a witness to a monstrous crime. The journal explained how Sarah had been held captive, but she had a plan. Her final entry, dated 7 years ago, spoke of a risky escape. She had been on the run, hiding in the woods, using her extensive knowledge of the trail to evade a killer. The chilling realization was that Sarah was not a body at the bottom of the lake. She was a survivor, a ghost in the woods who had been hunted for 7 years. The journal was a living testament to Sarah's last days. It was not a tale of a naive victim, but of a resourceful survivor. Detective Ramirez read every word, his mind racing to fill in the 7-year gap. The entries described a harrowing experience. Sarah, in her last entry, detailed how Silas had taken her and Emily to the cabin, a place she now described as a prison. Emily, the shy librarian, had become a victim immediately. Her disappearance a tragic side note to Sarah's survival. Sarah, with her quick thinking and extensive knowledge of the wilderness, had managed to free herself. She did not describe how, only that the opportunity had presented itself in a fleeting moment of Silas's carelessness. Her escape was not an act of blind panic. It was a planned, deliberate move. The journal detailed her final act of defiance, leaving Emily's body in her own sleeping bag and sinking it in a remote lake. It was a desperate, calculated clue, a breadcrumb trail she hoped someone would one day find. She knew the location of the lake. She had seen it on a map of Silas's land. Her final words, a hurried scrawl in her journal, were a chilling message of hope and terror. She was hiding in the woods, using her knowledge of the Appalachian Trail to evade her pursuer. She had a plan to find her way to the nearest town, to get help. This new information changed everything. The case was no longer about finding a body or a killer. It was about finding a survivor who had been on the run for 7 years. The new search was for Sarah, a ghost in the woods who may have spent a decade hiding in plain sight. Ramirez's team, with renewed vigor, began to re-examine every reported sighting of a suspicious person. Every unclaimed person, every Jane Doe from the last 7 years in the region. The search was vast, a monumental task, but they had a new lead. Sarah's journal mentioned a secret hideout she had known about for years, an old, dilapidated ranger station not on any official map, a place only a seasoned hiker would know. The ranger station, a forgotten relic of the past, was a 4-day hike from the cabin. It was an arduous journey, one that only Sarah could have survived. But she did not. When the team reached the ranger station, they found it empty. It was a dead end. But as they scoured the area, they found a small, rusted compass nailed to a nearby tree, the same symbol as Silas's tattoo. It was a taunt, a message. Silas knew her plan. He had been one step ahead of her the entire time. The trail of a survivor had become a brutal cat and mouse game, a hunt that had been going on for years. The hope of finding her alive was replaced by a more chilling realization. Silas had been hunting her, and her final entry was not a message of survival, but of a desperate, final stand. The discovery of the compass at the old ranger station was a cruel, mocking punch to the gut. It was a clear message. Silas had been there. He had known Sarah's plan. The hope of finding her alive, of her having survived for 7 years in the wilderness, evaporated into a cold, hard truth. She had been hunted. The trail of a survivor had become a trail of a victim. The search for a girl on the run was over, replaced by a grim new task, finding her body. Ramirez and his team, their resolve hardened by this new, chilling revelation, returned to the cabin, certain that the final answer was hidden somewhere on the property. The compass, a symbol of direction, was now a symbol of misdirection. Silas had been toying with them. He had wanted them to find the journal, to follow the breadcrumb trail to the ranger station, only to find his signature waiting for them. It was a psychological game, a victory lap in a game of cat and mouse. But the discovery of the compass also provided a crucial piece of information. Silas was alive, and he was still in the area, watching. The hunt for the phantom killer was back on. Ramirez knew that a man who plays games with his victims' families and with the police is a man who craves attention, who wants to be found. He just needed to figure out where Silas had gone, what new lair he had built for himself. The team returned to the cabin with a new purpose. They scoured the woods around the property, this time looking for anything that seemed out of place, anything that looked like a recent dig site. The work was slow, painstaking. The woods were thick, the ground hard and rocky. They worked for days, finding nothing but frustration and dead ends. The hope that had been so cruelly dangled in front of them was now a bitter memory. But then, on the 3rd day, a team member noticed something. An area of ground, far from the cabin and the trail, looked different. The soil was darker, more fertile than the surrounding area, and a few stubborn, deep-rooted weeds grew in a rough rectangular pattern. It was almost imperceptible, a scar on the land that had nearly healed over 7 years. The forensic team moved in. They worked with a quiet reverence, first with brushes to clear the surface debris, then with small trowels, carefully scraping away the layers of earth. The work was slow, delicate. Minutes felt like hours. Then a trowel struck something soft. The digging stopped. The forensic anthropologist knelt down and with painstaking care used her hands to gently brush away the remaining soil. First a piece of fabric appeared, faded but still recognizably purple. Then a bone. The search was over. They had found Sarah. The end of the 7-year mystery was not a moment of relief, but the final crushing confirmation of a loss that had been a silent agony for 7 years. The discovery of Sarah's body was a culmination of hope and despair. The forensic anthropologist confirmed what they already knew in their hearts. The remains, buried deep beneath the forest floor, were Sarah's. She had not survived the hunt. The purple sleeping bag, found in the lake with Laura's body, had been a diversion, a desperate attempt to create a trail of misdirection. Her own body, her final resting place, was a few hundred yards from the cabin, a cruel proximity to her last prison. It was a silent testament to a 7-year-long game of cat and mouse that had ended in tragedy. With the definitive discovery, the hunt for Silas Crowe escalated from a cold case investigation into an active manhunt. The compass he left at the ranger station was no longer a taunt. It was a clue. He was a man who wanted to be seen, to be found, to be caught. The psychological profile was clear. He was an attention-seeking psychopath who thrived on the game. Ramirez and his team, now understanding his twisted logic, began to think like him. They knew he was still in the area, watching, waiting for the final act of his macabre drama to unfold. The end came quietly, not with a burst of gunfire or a dramatic chase, but with a quiet tip. A local bartender, a woman with a keen eye for faces, saw an old man with a faded compass tattoo sitting alone in a dusty corner booth. He was drinking a cheap beer, a ghost in a place full of people. She had seen his face on the news, a faded image from a 7-year-old missing persons report. She called the police. When the officers arrived, Silas Crowe was still sitting in the booth, his beer half empty. He offered no resistance, no fight. He simply raised his hands, a small, knowing smile on his face. He had finally been found. The discovery of the compass at the ranger station had been a cruel, mocking taunt, but it was also a crucial mistake. Silas, a man who believed he was a ghost, had left a piece of himself behind. He had wanted them to see his work, to know he was the author of the chaos. He had craved recognition, a feeling that had eluded him his entire life. This craving was his undoing. The trail of a survivor had become a brutal cat and mouse game, a hunt that had been going on for years. The hope of finding her alive was replaced by a chilling new realization. Silas had been hunting her, and the compass was his victory lap. With the confirmation of Sarah's death, the focus of the investigation shifted entirely. The manhunt for Silas Crowe was on. Detective Ramirez and his team, now understanding the sick mind of their killer, began to think like him. They knew he was still in the area, watching, waiting for the final act of his macabre drama to unfold. A man who plays games with his victims' families and with the police is a man who craves attention, who wants to be caught. They just needed to figure out where Silas had gone. The end came quietly, not with a burst of gunfire or a dramatic chase, but with a quiet tip. A local bartender, a woman with a keen eye for faces, saw an old man with a faded compass tattoo sitting alone in a dusty corner booth. He was drinking a cheap beer, a ghost in a place full of people. She had seen his face on the news, a faded image from a 7-year-old missing persons report. She called the police. When the officers arrived, Silas Crowe was still sitting in the booth, his beer half empty. He offered no resistance, no fight. He simply raised his hands, a small, knowing smile on his face. He had finally been found. His quiet suburban life was over. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and silent. Dante Voss, the man who had created a 6-year vortex of pain and uncertainty, sat at the metal table, uncuffed, looking more like a man inconvenienced by a traffic ticket than a suspect in a double homicide. For the first hour, he stonewalled every question with a simple, dismissive phrase. Never heard of him. Never been there. You've got the wrong guy. He was patient, confident, and utterly impenetrable. Ramirez let him build his wall of lies, brick by brick. Then he began his own methodical construction. He didn't accuse. He presented facts. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were Milo Radich's bank statements with the cash deposits circled in red. "Let's talk about Milo's side income," Ramirez said calmly. Voss shrugged. "Kid probably had a weekend job. None of my business." Ramirez slid another folder across the table. This one contained cell tower data maps showing the pings from the burner phone mirroring Milo's every move. "This is your phone, Dante. We tracked it from the point of sale. It was always with Milo like a shadow." Voss's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was the first crack in the facade. Then came the Starlight Motor Inn. Ramirez laid out the crime scene photos of the recovered guest ledger. He pointed to the entry for room 7, to the note about the silver sedan with Arizona plates. "Milo's car, Dante, in your motel on the night he died." Voss countered, his voice losing some of its earlier casualness. "Anyone could have been driving it. Kid probably loaned it to a friend." "He was with a friend," Ramirez agreed, his voice dropping slightly. "A young woman. We have a witness, Dante. She worked at the motel. She remembers you. She remembers the argument coming from room 7. A loud, violent argument, then a thud, and then silence." Voss stared at Ramirez, his eyes like chips of ice. He said nothing. "She saw you leave, Dante. In the middle of the night, she saw you putting something big and heavy into the trunk of Milo's car, and she saw the girl. She saw Asha Baduri get into the passenger seat. She said the girl looked like she had her soul scooped out, a ghost. That's what our witness saw." Voss stared at the blank wall behind Ramirez's head. The detective could see the calculations happening behind his cold eyes. He wasn't grappling with guilt. He was running the odds. He was a career criminal, assessing the strength of the cage being built around him. He knew what a witness statement combined with the phone records and the financial data would mean to a jury. He was cornered, and he knew it. His arrogance finally evaporated, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. "So, what's the deal?" Voss asked, his voice flat. "There's no deal for murder," Ramirez replied. "But there's the story. There's your version of events, or there's ours. Right now, our version is that you're a monster who preyed on a young man and his friend. You tell me what happened." Voss was silent for a full minute, weighing his options. Then he began to talk. His confession was delivered in a cold, detached monotone, devoid of any emotion or remorse. He confirmed the task force's theory with chilling accuracy. Milo was his courier. He'd gotten scared and wanted out. He'd brought the girl Asha as backup. A move Voss described as stupid. The argument was exactly as they'd imagined. Milo trying to quit. Voss refusing. He got loud. Voss said simply, "So I shut him up." He described killing Milo with a single brutal blow, as if describing fixing a leaky faucet. He then detailed the horror of the hours that followed. He admitted to terrorizing Asha, using her as an unwilling accomplice to clean the room and load Milo's body into the car. He confessed that he drove them to Silas Lake, a place he knew from a previous job, and forced the terrified young woman to help him wrap her friend's body in her own sleeping bag, to help him wire it shut and chain on the weights. He spoke of the sexual assault not as a crime of passion, but as an act of dominance, a way to break her spirit completely. Ramirez felt a cold sickness rise in him, but his face remained a mask of professional calm. And then what, Dante? What happened to Asha? Voss fell silent again, a faint, cruel smirk playing on his lips. He held the last piece of the puzzle, the answer to the question that had haunted Kalen Baduri for 8 years. He was back in control. I want a guarantee, he said. Solitary, protective custody. I've got enemies inside. Ramirez didn't bargain. You tell us where she is and I'll pass your request to the DA. That's all I can do. Voss seemed to consider this. Then he nodded. Get me a pen and paper. An officer brought in a pad of paper and a pen. Dante Voss, the man who had created a 6-year vortex of pain and uncertainty, leaned over the table. With a steady hand, as if drafting a simple grocery list, he began to draw a crude map. It showed a series of dirt roads in a desolate stretch of desert on the Utah-Nevada border, a place of rock and scrub brush hundreds of miles from Silas Lake. He drew a small cluster of rock formations and placed a single neat X beside it. He pushed the paper across the table. That's where you'll find her. For Michael, the news of Sarah's discovery and Silas's capture was not a relief, but a final, devastating blow. There was a funeral now, a final resting place. But the pain was not gone. The family of Laura Vance finally had answers. The families of the other women whose cases had been solved by Silas's lockbox, they all had a resolution. The mystery was solved. The predator was caught. But the quiet, empty space in Michael's heart remained. The trail had gone cold for a second time, but this time, it was a finality he could never outrun. The story of Sarah, the free-spirited hiker, was no longer a tale of a missing woman, but a tragic story of a survivor who fought to the end, a hero who left a breadcrumb trail for justice, even in death.